2023. We are on a slight timetable today because we have a very excellent audit report that we'd like to go through and get through. And another 5:30 committee of the whole meeting, so we are trying to move with some urgency, but we want to make sure everything's answered. But before we get too far along, if you'd all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I appreciate it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much and welcome again. That brings us to roll call. Dr. Campbell-Boytel, please.
Okay. President Lindsay Wilson.
Here.
Treasurer Lisa McIntyre. Here. Trustee James Mazurik.
Here.
Trustee Karen Meyer. Here. Trustee Melissa Stewart. Here. Vice President Sarah Prescott is going to be joining us
In process.
And Secretary Kim Campbell-Boytel. I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That brings us to number 4 on our agenda. I will hand it over to Dr. Campbell-Boytel again. Would you please present?
Be happy to. I bring motion 32 that the agenda be adopted as presented. Support.
So I have a motion properly presented by Dr. Campbell-Boytel and supported by Ms. Stewart. Do we have any discussion on the adoption of our agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. Thank you so much. That brings us to number 5 on our agenda, our consent resolutions. Again, I will hand it over to Dr. Campbell-Boytel.
Okay. President Wilson, I bring motion 33 that the board accept the consent agenda items for approval as follows. 5A, minutes of October 10th, 2023 Board of Education meeting, and the minutes of October 10th, 2023 closed session meeting of the Board of Education. Support.
So I have a motion properly presented by Dr. Campbell-Boytel and supported by Ms. McIntyre. Do we need any discussion on consent resolution items? I had a chance to look at the minutes. They all look good to me. Excellent. Thank you so much. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So that motion passes. Thank you so much. Bringing us to number 6, our communications, our secretary, Dr. Campbell-Boytel.
Yes, we have had communication to the MPS BOE at northvilleschools.org this week.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And that brings us to number 7 on our agenda. Our first of 2 opportunities for public comment. I do have one card up here, Mr. Alvarez, if you'd like to come to the mic. And while you're doing so, I'll remind you, we offer every meeting 2 opportunities for members of the public to make comment, 3 minutes apiece. We do hold you to that time period, but you're free to address us with whatever concerns or issues that you have. I'll also state again, and you know all these by now, but this is not necessarily a time for us to interact or respond necessarily, but if we feel the need to, we certainly will.
Okay.
And if you would, before you get started, remind us again, just so we all know your connection to the district, and then go ahead with your time.
My name is John Almaraz. I live in Northville and have a student at Northville High School.
Thank you so much.
Well, I wanted to present to you issues by the date of occurrence. However, I'm going to bring something up that happened immediately. September 2023, JC missed one gym quiz valued at approximately 5 points, and his grade went from an A+ to a C for one quiz. I sent a request for an explanation, and I asked if all students prior to JC who missed the same quiz did their grade drop 2 grades. I got no answer. However, a couple days later, his grade just mysteriously popped back up. JC has an IEP. First IEP was dated October 2022. State accommodations were for the PSAT. The second one was dated January 2023, same accommodations. PSAT for state accommodations. We had a meeting, and everyone in that meeting agreed that JC no longer needed state accommodations for the PSAT, but he did need them for the SAT, and that's what his IEP stated. He arrived on time and was told that he was not allowed to take that PSAT because he has an IEP. I don't get it. I asked why this happened and got no response. As you see, this is a common thread that I encounter. I get all the time. Simple question, why? And again, no response. So my question to you is, why wasn't he allowed to take the PSAT? I could file a federal civil rights complaint and likely win because his IEP, it's clear that his state accommodations was for the SAT and was denied the opportunity to take the PSAT. But I'm not. I'm not like some of the staff that you have at Northville High School. Some of them lack honor, courage, and commitment. I'm just informing you, and I'm going to let you know in the next few meetings a lot of terrible things have happened to JC. When's it going to stop? For example, just the other day, Miss Joanne Jackson embarrassed me in front of the entire group by making fun of my email address that my mother gave me when I was a nickname that my mother gave me. She put JC in the middle by asking me if I had any questions to his gym teacher. If JC was not there, I would have reiterated everything I put in writing about that grade. But I'm not like those teachers, some of those teachers. I do have honor. I do have courage. And I do have empathy. So I will see you at the next meeting, and in the next meeting, I'm going to bring up Principal Tony Koski and others who denied JC medical attention after he was beaten in the head, knocked out unconscious, taken to the emergency room, and thank God they found no blood clot. But he sat there for almost 2 hours. And your principal did not call for medical attention. If you read your own concussion guidelines, what does it say to do? They didn't do that for him.
Mr. Alvarez, I will.
So thank you for your time.
Yep.
And I'll see you guys in a month.
Okay, thank you. I will address one item that you mentioned, I guess two. One is that I myself see fluctuations in grades very easily, and they can fluctuate quickly and easily in Schoology. I don't know the exact circumstances of JC's situation, but I see it in my own kids. They miss a quiz or they get a poor grade on a quiz, and their grade can really fluctuate. I'll just offer that observation to you. The second is, we do, you went over this time a little bit on time, and we're flexible and we have empathy and we understand where you're coming from, but we will hold you to it next time, 3 minutes, and I appreciate you, committing to do the same. Awesome. Any other comments? All right. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I came in late.
That's fine. An A+ to a C for one quiz. And I never got a response why. And when I called to complain, it just mysteriously popped in there. No.
Okay, thank you again. Any other public comment? I don't believe we have any. That brings us to number 8 on our agenda, our audit report. I'll hand it over to our treasurer, Ms. McIntyre, please. Yeah.
I'd like to bring forth motion 34 that the board approve the 2022-23 audit report as presented. Support.
So I have a motion properly presented by Ms. McIntyre and supported by Ms. Prescott. Our audit report, I'll hand it over to you guys.
I'm going just to introduce I know the Finance Committee sat through Jennifer's presentation last week, but for those who are not on the committee, this is Jennifer Chambers, who is a partner with Plant Moran, had kind of headed up our audit this year. So Jennifer's been here, 4 or 5 years maybe. So anyway, I'm just going to turn it over to Jennifer, and she'll go through a quick PowerPoint, just kind of capture the highlights of the audit.
Thank you. I appreciate the time on the agenda tonight. I know it's going to be quick run through, as I know you have another session starting at 5:30, but we will run through the highlights of the audit. Happy to entertain any questions and address those, of course, time permitting. But thank you to the Board of Education for having me here tonight to present the results of the June 30, 2023 audit. Before we get into the graph presentation, I did want to discuss a few deliverables that were included in the folders that we passed out, so that you know what's in front of you. The first is the basic financial statements, also referred to as the financial report. The second is the federal programs audit. And the third is the letter entitled Report to the Board of Education. These are currently in draft form, you'll see, but they are actually in the final stages of going through our proofreading department, and so we expect that they'll be final issued financial statements within the next few days. But for purposes of what we're covering here, these are the issued financial statements. They will not change. So as it relates to the first deliverable, the financial report, we have performed the audit of the district's financial statements in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and in accordance with government auditing standards. As a result of our audit, we have issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest form of assurance that we can give that the district's financial statements are fairly presented. Also included in the financial report is a footnote that describes that the district is subjected to bond and sinking fund compliance requirements, and that our procedures performed around that did not identify any compliance issues in accordance with how those are required to be spent. As it relates to the second item I mentioned, the federal programs audit, this is a separate audit performed over the district's federal grants received. As part of this audit, there are different requirements in terms of which programs we test each year. We don't test every program every year, but this year we did test 3, and those were the Child Nutrition Cluster, the Education Stabilization Fund, which houses the ESSER grants, along with the Special Education Cluster. And for all 3 of those programs, we did not find any compliance issues and have issued unmodified or, again, clean opinions on those grants as well. The final deliverable that I wanted to touch on briefly is the one entitled Report to the Board of Education. This outlines required post-audit communications and includes several informational items as well for your review and consideration. There continues to be impactful changes in the landscape, particularly as it relates to state funding, both for what was experienced in 22-23, along with what's coming up in fiscal 24 and beyond. And the informational section really covers kind of our narrative around that, just to help aid in your understanding of what's going on in the financial landscape. And, you get a lot of information, and this is just meant to supplement that, to kind of aid in the overall understanding. I do want to congratulate the district and thank Mr. Zoff and his staff for a successful audit. It's a lot of work for them to respond to all of our requests, and we tested 3 federal programs this year, which is significant, and so we appreciate all that went into helping to make this a successful audit. And with that, we will move on to the graph presentation. So the graph presentation focuses primarily on the general fund. That is the primary operating fund for the district, and that's what we're going to highlight tonight. The first graph here that you have in front of you is the general fund revenue and transfers in. This slide shows the composition of general fund revenue, which totaled about $98.6 million in 2023. The percentages that you see are the current year percentages compared to the total, and those parenthetically referenced is the prior year percentage. So you have an idea what current year is versus prior year. When we look at the graph, the largest section of the graph in blue is your state revenue at about 76%. The next largest component of the general fund revenue is non-homestead property taxes at about 9.57%. And then your federal revenue in this fund was about 6%. And you can see there are some slight changes percentage-wise compared to last year. And really the primary driver of that is the federal grant piece. So there was much more COVID-19 related grants being spent in 2023 compared to 2022. And that's why we see that shift. But I would expect on a go-forward basis, and we'll continue to have this narrative throughout the results, on a go-forward basis, we'll expect things to return probably more closely to what they were last year from the way the revenue is spread. And then the inter-district revenue, I did just want to mention that houses the enhancement millage pass-through from the county along with Act 18 funds. So moving on to the next slide, this really takes a look at foundation allowance. So you'll recall I mentioned your largest component of revenue for the general fund is state source revenue. You get funded on a per pupil basis, which is the foundation allowance. And so here we wanted to present just over the time horizon, really what the fluctuations have been in per pupil funding. For a long time, more than 10 years, really there was very minimal increases in funding. Only recently we've seen there to be an increase in the level of per pupil funding, really kind of kicking in 21-22. This year, bumping that up to $9,150 per pupil. And then going forward into 2024, also another pretty substantial increase, bringing that up to about $9,600 per pupil. But I think what's impactful is to keep in mind that for such a long period of time, it was really below the 08-09 level. And so just now are we kind of surpassing that? But this graph doesn't take into account inflation. So it's really just meant for perspective on what has occurred at the state. But also kind of approaching it with caution as well, because there have been some much needed increases in the last few years on a per pupil basis. But just depending on what occurs at the state and kind of what they're already projecting, these types of increases may not be what we see in the future. So it's, taking them for what they are, but also proceeding with some caution around that. The next graph switches over to expenditures, again, continuing to look at the general fund. So this is a high-level functional distribution of where the general fund expenditures are. So total general fund expenditures are about $95.7 million, which is about an increase compared to $88 million in the prior year. Again, here we're showing parenthetically what the prior year percentages were. As you can see, expenditures as a percentage are pretty consistent year over year. A little bit of an increase in instruction, a little bit of a decrease in support, but by and large, pretty consistent year over year. Now we take a look at that same pool of general fund expenditures, but looking at it by object, which is really what type of expenditures were incurred in the general fund, and also looking at it compared to the prior year. So a couple of things that are impactful here. Again, I mentioned that increase in total expenditures from the 88 million to the 95.7. The one primary driver of this is actually related to a funding mechanism from the state referred to as the MIPSR's rate stabilization. You've heard this in the past, if you've heard these presentations referred to as 147C funds. Those are funds that come in, you record them as revenue, and then you're required to remit them back to the state. They get recorded as expenditures, so kind of a net zero. This year, the state implemented a second deposit, if you will, or stabilization, but it's a one-time. And so that is referred to as 147C2. And for Northville, that was about $5.3 million. So that is not, that's just in 23. It doesn't continue into 24. And so we thought it was important to highlight that because it does contribute to a large part of the expenditure increase year over year, particularly in the benefits. So we just wanted to draw that out. The other notable changes in capital outlay, you'll see a pretty significant decrease in spending there. Some of those COVID grants were used in the prior year for Chromebooks, computer equipment, and that would have been reflected in capital outlay. And again, that's kind of a one-time expenditure, so it didn't carry forward into the current year. So since we've covered revenues, expenditures, kind of pull it all together and look at general fund balance, really over a 10-year period, again, just to provide some context and perspective around how things have changed. Over the time horizon presented, you can see that the fund balance has increased to where it lands at June 30, 2023 of approximately $29.1 million. Of the total fund balance, there are amounts that are already earmarked for future use. There's a really tiny little gold bar at the top. That's already planned use of fund balance, kind of already dollars already spent, if you will. And then the blue portion is already committed as a result of your original budget adopted for 24, a planned use of fund balance of about $888,000. The remaining unassigned fund balance is in the orange section, and that's about $27.8 million. Along the bottom of the graph, we have what is a pretty common metric used to kind of put, again, fund balance into perspective, and it's the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. This helps to kind of align, if you're seeing an increase in fund balance, here, there's also been an increase in the expenditure base. And so when you are able to compare those two, it again gives you some context of increases and decreases. And so really since about 2018, the district has hovered in that 30% range, aside from 2019, a little bump, but around that 30% fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. And then just for, again, comparison purposes or another data point, as of June 30, 2022, the statewide average was about 20.3%. So kind of summing it up, we really just wanted to provide some watch points for the board to continue to have on your radar. So I did mention that going into 2024, the foundation allowance will increase to $9,608 per pupil. But again, cautioning around whether or not that level of increase will continue into the future. The non-recurring COVID-19 related grants are expected to come to completion in September of 2024. So that revenue source will no longer continue after that time. What's interesting is in the absence of these emergency grant relief funds that have really been in place for the last couple of years, if those were not in place, the district would have utilized fund balance. So that did assist in kind of maintaining or increasing fund balance in this time period. I know you're keeping a watchful eye on enrollment trends, and while you were able to recapture some from those initial pieces of the pandemic, continuing to monitor how that plays through will be an important consideration because that's the other piece of the equation to the per pupil funding, and that will drive your state revenue. And as we mentioned, that's the biggest piece of the revenue that you receive. We do expect there to be continued state funding with regards to that MIPSR's liability in that 147C1, the one that's been there for quite some time. We expect that to continue. And new coming into this current school year that you're operating in is the universal free breakfast and lunch program. So that, I'll say, supplements the federal child nutrition cluster program. That's a statewide program that, so you'll continue to be eligible for those federal grants. And then any child who's not covered by the federal program then gets free breakfast or lunch through the state. And then always important to continue to negotiate competitive but sustainable agreements, since your largest component of expenditures is salaries. Being a service organization, personnel driven, the ability to maintain competitive but again sustainable cost structures is important. With that, I will welcome any questions.
Questions? Great presentation. Thank you for the thoroughness and the watch points. I appreciate all of them. But questions, observations from others first?
I'll just say once again, appreciate the audit. It is really important. I think we have a very good financial process so that we have accurate understanding, and that's what's helped us in the last number of years. But I think, and so I appreciate the time and effort to tell us that we have an unmodified review audit, which is, again, as best you can get. But most importantly, I really enjoy, or I value giving us the kind of the future considerations. One of the things we have to watch out for, we've done a pretty good job. And, to be honest, you can be doing a great job, and one misstep, you can fall off the cliff. And so that's, I think, the most important thing. And I think the sustainable agreements is something that worries me. Not so much that I think we will not talk with all of our constituents in good faith and try to come to something fair, but I do tend to see some other districts doing some, I'll say, some very unusual expenditures, which are going to create a very difficult situation for them in the future. And so as we try to compete with that, that's going to really be a challenge. And I think that's probably our biggest challenge over the next year as we head into new negotiations. And so, again, thank you for the feedback. Mike, thank you for the team. I know you always go, oh, great, let's have another audit. You just look forward to this every year. But again, thank you, because it's appreciated. And, we didn't get to be a successful district without having a disciplined process, and this proves it.
Right. Well, and I could just, to expand on that a bit, I would say that one of our strengths has also been the continuing relationship with Plant Moran. And as I'm looking at the third of our documents in our folder, which is the report to the Board of Ed, which really gives us, your background guidance, item by item, but generally managing the changing financial resources landscape is something that you continue to be a supporter of, resource for us as we make those difficult decisions. And we're grateful for that too. Thank you.
Keep looking too at the COVID-19, the federal funding, right? That is such a significant chunk of our budget. It grew so much this past year that we will not have that in future years. So it would be really easy to get complacent. No, we'll just, we have all this money coming in, but then you compare that with the state income. There's been so much conversation around, we got such an increase from the state. Yes, however, it's still, that percentage of our budget is balanced by the federal monies.
Right.
Or offset, I guess.
One thing that I can't really call to mind that I don't know that we've seen is what, to your great point, and Lisa, following up on Lisa's point about how you've called out for us that these federal monies will fall away, is the operational costs that we've incurred that, hit our balance sheets as an expense, but that are not built to last, right? Like the summer program, we know we're not going to be able to continue to do. We're not going to buy the same number of books we just put into every single library. So I can't quantify in my mind sort of what exactly is the other side of the coin. Like we're not going to have this revenue anymore. Well, we're also not going to have these, what amount of expenses? Is it basically one for one?
So when you look at last year, the biggest revenue item that we took from ESSER was the Section 11T money. And basically the largest component of the spend in that area was we really supplanted our resource room teachers and our ESL teachers, because those kind of fit the permissible subgroups that we can spend 11T on. And really, I think by and large, we don't have any intention of,
Yeah, we wouldn't discontinue
those
pieces,
resources.
of course, yes. So that's where the watch point
right.
is that it's a program we want to keep, we must keep,
Exactly.
intend to keep, but we supplanted,
Right.
which is to your point about saving, but for emergency funds, we would have drawn down. Do you have a sense of how much is planned to be kept versus not planned to be kept?
Yeah, I mean, what I can do is pull together a kind of a list. It'll be a short list because we really didn't do a lot of one-time spend in non-personnel areas. One of those areas would be the library books, for example. Another one, as you pointed out, Sarah, the summer programming. I guess we need to have a discussion about that. We did with 11T. We used some of those funds to allow or supplement some summer camp fees for our Act 18 students. So that would, again, we would have to have a discussion, do we want to continue that or not? But it's some of those items, so I can pull together what that total is, but it's not really going to be huge. It'll be, by and large, it was with 11T, it was really supplanting those salaries. But I'll give you a breakdown of what that
It'd
is.
be interesting.
I mean, we don't really know how negotiations are gonna go, and we know we're gonna spend some more money there, but if you kind of ignore that piece, our fund balance is gonna slowly come down because we're gonna have to absorb some of these things, and, that's the question is it fall by 1%? What exactly is gonna fall each year? Is it a 0.5%, 1%? So I do see that our 30.4% or whatever that number is going to slowly come down, just because of absorbing some of these things that we can no longer.
Right.
And then on top of that is going to be just what's going to happen because of, entering into contract negotiations.
Right.
That is also going to have some impact on that.
Right.
And I also think the inflationary pressures are something that, in my mind, are going to have to be a pretty huge watch point, as we were just talking about with that money coming out and that one-to-one question. You go to a grocery store, you think back to what you were paying for something a year or two ago and what you're paying now. That's another factor that I'm sure, and I'm grateful. And before we finish this, Mike, I want to say thank you to you and your team and your team. They're in the office next to me, so they listen to my singing, and bless them. But very thorough, really professional to work with. And I know, Deb Conyers is always in there and always working with them and takes it so seriously.
Right.
So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to
I'm
thank
grateful.
Jennifer too. I mean, we've had a great team. We're very fortunate, every year Plant Moran and their team. And then really, like, as you pointed out, Deb in our business office, I think we try to provide information as timely as possible so they can do their job. So I appreciate it.
This is my third year going through this process, and I'm always sort of deeply comforted by the process, the deal that you go through, the work that you put into it, and then the results sometimes speak for themselves. I think it just is a testament to kind of the Northville way, right? I mean, we just do things really well here. So hats off to the finance crew and to Plant Moran. Thank you so much for your expertise. Anything else?
No, again, Mike, thank you for the, when we do find little areas of improvement, I like the process discipline of, digging deeper and saying, what went wrong? What can we do better? What can we put in to prevent it from ever happening in the future? And that's kind of what builds it. And so those are the things that give you the confidence that when you're seeing these numbers, you can make good decisions, right? Because if you can't trust your numbers, how do you make a good decision? So I appreciate that.
What's next technically? Anything? You said you're doing final
Next year.
edits? That's
Yep.
it? Yeah,
So
okay.
you'll get, final PDFs and those will get put up on your website from a transparency perspective. We'll submit it to the state. It's due by November 1st, so we've got plenty of time to do that. And then off till next year.
Excellent. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
All right, well, that brings us to our second of two opportunities for public comment.
Do we need to vote?
Do we need to vote on this?
Yes,
Oh,
we have to
yes.
accept it.
That we approve the audit report, yes.
All right, so I have a motion properly presented by Ms. McIntyre and supported by Ms. Prescott. Thank you so much for the reminder. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much for bringing us back and not letting me forget that. Thank you so much. So that passes. Thank you. And that brings us, like I said, to number 9, our second of two opportunities for public comment. Going once, going twice, and I will call us adjourned for this meeting at 5:34. Maybe let's take 5 minutes to grab sandwiches and repack, unpack for the next session.